Welcome to Cold War Conversations, the home of real stories of the Cold War.
Cubans also had towers, and they had a fence line, but there was a gap in between our fences, kind of a no man's land in between. And you could see the Cubans over there, and you would be able to see them doing their shift changes like we do. And sometimes we'd give them the friendly one finger salute if they're watching us, and they would do it back.
Chris was a US Marine assigned to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, a sprawling US base on the communist island of Cuba. He describes the guard duty along the fence line where the proximity of the Cuban border created an unusual tension. Chris also shares anecdotes of encounters with defectors and the fascinating dynamics of life on the base, from observing Cuban life across the fence to the camaraderie among Marines. His stories paint a vivid picture of military life there. Chris also touches on the challenges faced by service members, including the isolation and the impact of alcohol on morale. With mandatory counselling sessions addressing alcoholism, he reflects on the importance of mental health support within the military community. I'm delighted to welcome Chris to our Cold War conversation.
I had always been interested in the military, even as a kid. Watched all the war movies and read war books and military books. Had family in the military. My brother was in the Army, grandparents. My dad was in the Air Force. My stepfather, he was a retired Marine. So I kind of went that route. And I ended up in the Marine Corps. I wasn't the greatest of students in high school, so I didn't have a whole lot of aspirations to go to college at the time, so off to the military I went.
What year was this that you start with the Marines?
In 1989, in August, right after high school.
Where does your basic training take place?
Once you join, you are shipped down to the lovely place of Parris Island, South Carolina.
And I guess it's not a holiday camp there, huh?
Not particularly. Now, if you like people screaming at you and sand fleas biting you and the smell of the swamp, it would be great if you like those things.
The basic training sort of lived up to the movie expectations.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It was somewhat similar, if you've ever seen Full Metal Jacket back, there was definitely some similarities.
How long was that basic training?
I believe then, and it varies all the time, I think then it was 10 or 11 weeks of basic training.
How did you find that training? Were you ready for it, or did you find it more challenging than you expected?
Physically challenging. I was in pretty decent shape. I was a pretty decent runner at the time, so I was physically fit. It was trying to get over the emotional part of it, of having somebody in your face screaming at you. So, but I persevered and made it through, no problem.
How did they decide what role you were going to have in the Marines?
Well, me in particular, I went under what's called an open contract. I just kind of signed a contract, said you can have me for 4 years, and I just threw the dice, and they were going to pick a job for me. And why I went that route, I don't know, but I was just ready to get out of the house and go and get away from home and go start my own life. So you don't find out what your job's going to be until the end of boot camp, or you would go through in those days, we had a small course after boot camp called Marine Combat Training, or MCT. It was a very condensed version of infantry school. They gave it to everybody in the Marine Corps, no matter what your MOS was going to be, even if you were a cook. Because in the Marine Corps, everybody's a rifleman in the Marine Corps first. And then you're a cook or truck driver or supply man or whatever. So you go there for about 4 weeks, and that's when you're going to learn what your MOS is going to be. And I end up going straight to the infantry field. The infantry field is divided down into its own particular segments, like a rifleman, machine gunner, mortarman, or anti-tank.
And you were infantryman, yeah?
Yes, I went infantry. I ended up becoming a tow gunner, a tow missile gunner.
So that's the wire-guided anti-tank missile, yeah?
That's correct. The TOW, tow, stands for tube launched, optically tracked, wire-guided.
And where was your first posting, and when was that?
It was towards the end of infantry school. That's when you find out where you're actually going to be stationed at, anywhere in the U.S. or overseas. And several weeks before we graduated infantry school. That's when I found out myself and one other guy were going to be going to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. And I had heard of it, but I hadn't have particularly very much knowledge of it.
By this time, the Berlin Wall has come down. Do you remember hearing about the Berlin Wall falling?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, I do remember it. Yeah.
Can you tell me how you heard about it?
On TV, I always watched the news, and I always kind of stayed up on current events a little bit. So I was pretty keen on watching that on news, watching the people on top of the wall and chipping away at it, and so yeah, it was definitely an interesting time.
Absolutely. I think a lot of people thought, there goes my job in the military. So you receive orders for Guantanamo Bay. How do they get you in there? Is it ship, plane, or how is the transit done?
It is by airplane. Only supplies go by ship, or actually barge, I should say. So we received orders, myself and another Marine. We received orders, and we had to take a bus from Camp Lejeune to Norfolk Naval Base in Virginia. There's also a naval air station there. So that's where we were supposed to catch our flight. There was some misunderstanding when we got to Norfolk. On your orders, it actually has a phone number for you to call. So I had to go over to a payphone if everybody remembers what a payphone was. But I had to go to payphone and call this number, and somebody from a nearby Marine unit or Marine barracks, because every naval base has a Marine barracks, they were going to pick us up and take us to the naval airfield where there was going to be a what they call a military airlift command flight, which shuttles people back and forth from the base twice a week, and we were supposed to catch the flight from there. And so they took us to the Marine barracks because we were thinking that's where we were going to be stationed. We weren't exactly sure, because we're 18, 19 years old, don't know anything. And there was some disagreement about whether we were supposed to be going overseas, whether we were going to Norfolk to stay there. And then finally somebody figured it out. Oh no, they're going to Guantanamo Bay. So they had to throw us back into another van with all our stuff and hustle us over to the airfield and get us on the plane to get down there. So we made it in time and got on the plane and arrived in Cuba.
And prior to you being sent out there, were you given any information about the base and how it operated or anything like that?
No, we knew virtually nothing about what was going on. All we knew was our destination. That was it. Had no idea.
When you arrive in Guantanamo, what are your first impressions of what you see?
When I walk off the plane, I thought it was going to be, jungle or in huts and stuff, but it was a big, kind of a sprawling base and very very hot, very arid, I should say, because people think that all of Cuba is jungle, and it's not. Like particularly the spot where Guantanamo is, it's almost desert like. You have cactus, sand, dirt, very dry. So yeah, but it was, they met us there at the plane. Of course, we're tired. Our uniforms were all wrinkly, carrying all our gear, and haven't slept in a day and a half. And then we get there, they meet us at the plane, and they take us over to processes at their admin center.
And I've looked at the base on the map, and you're right, it does look sprawling. It looks like a bigger area than I thought it would be. So where are you going to be located?
Well, the weird thing about Guantanamo Bay is it's divided by the bay itself. There's actually two parts of the base. The bay bisects the whole base entirely. So there's the eastern part is called windward, and the western part is called leeward. And leeward is where the airfield is at. And then all the main stuff is over on the other side, on the windward side. All your headquarters, your PX, your commissary, even a McDonald's and ice cream shops, all that stuff's over on the windward side. So there's a ferry that runs in between both of them. They use an old landing craft with the kind with the bow that drops down, like Iwo Jima or D-Day, So that's how you transport it back and forth. It could carry vehicles and people. So the way the base is set up for the Marine Corps, all the Marines are under what's called Marine Barracks, Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. And then you have two what are called rifle security companies. You have RCL, which is RC Leeward, and RC Windward. And obviously, the Windward company is stationed on the windward side, the Leeward company is stationed on the leeward side, and you will be assigned to one of those companies. Now, the force, the Marine detachment that's in Guantanamo Bay, it's almost kind of a self-sustaining force. We probably had about 400 or so, maybe 500 Marines total there, and that included from the base, from the Marine commander down, you included all your admin clerks, supply. We even had a tank detachment. We had an artillery detachment, and then we had always a few little ancillary things like your cooks and things like that. So, and we had one company, our company on the leeward side, which is where I was going to be going. So I was going to be crossing the bay to go process at our admin center, and then coming back to the leeward side where the airfield's at. We were there to guard the airfield and that side of the base. So we were actually a smaller company than the one that was on the windward side because there was more land on the windward side. They have a bigger fence line, so they needed more people over there. But I wound up on the leeward side.
What are your first few days like there? I mean, you're the new intake. How are you treated by the more experienced Marines there?
Well, you you quickly find out. It was kind of a shock, being around some of these NCOs because and they do treat you. They kind of look down upon you because you're the new guy, and it's understandable. But they try to take care of you, but kind of they're not sure about you, kind of thing. So they want to size you up, sort of. I quickly found out, our NCOs, corporals and sergeants, they had absolute rule over us. If you didn't do what they told you to do, you might have got some punishment, or you might have even got dealt a hand. You know, because we only had on our side of the base, on Leeward, we only had 3 officers and 1 or 2 staff NCOs, and especially the officers, they were off doing their own thing. You didn't see them very much, and our staff NCOs kind of turned a blind eye, to what was going on, but not that I disliked it or anything, but you kind of had to, you're kind of forced just to fall on trail with them and do what they told you to do.
So what did they tell you to do? What was a day like in the Marines in Guantanamo Bay?
Well, when you first get there, you do all your admin stuff and everything, and you get introduced to your platoon. They kind of you get your room assigned to you. You're going to be bunking with 3 other guys. There's 4 to a room, and depending on the week, you get we had 2 platoons there at our company, and 1 platoon was on duty on the fence line, and 1 was off duty doing either training or you were off. You had the weekend off. You If your platoon was on duty, you fell into what's called a training. They would train you up on how to work the fence line, and you would they would assign you with somebody, a more senior guy who's been there for a little while, and he would shadow you on your post. He would teach you all the regulations and what to look for out there on the fence line. So you would spend a couple weeks doing that, get familiar with everything on the fence line on your duty weeks, and then on your off weeks, you would be doing things like training. Maybe go to we would have a live fire with our smaller caliber machine guns, our M60s or our M16s, or maybe a pistol shoot, or just do some sort of training off to the side for that week. But our and that's how you kind of your life was. It just rotated from one week to one week, off duty, off duty, on duty, off duty, and it got monotonous a lot, after a while.
I can I can imagine. So the guard duty on the fence line, how did that work? Because the other side of the fence is the enemy, so
Right.
it's an unusual posting because you are really
Right.
close to the opposition.
Right. I guess, you know, between Desert Storm and Vietnam, that's probably the and it was probably the closest you could come to combat, other than the DMZ in Korea too. But we had a fence line, a tall. I think the fence was probably a good 8 9 foot tall, maybe more, but it was barbed wire, and it spanned the entire or perimeter of the whole entire base. It was only place that the fence stopped was at the water's edge, either on the Caribbean side or on the base on the bay side. And there were occasionally there were we had guard towers, and these guard towers were big. They looked like those old medieval siege towers. They're all made of thick wood, and they were about 30 to 40 foot up tall. And that's where you had what we called big eyes. They were big binoculars like you see on naval ships, and they were very powerful. And you could look into Cuba. Onto the Cuban side, you can see the Cubans, because the Cubans also had towers and they had a fence line, but there was a gap in between our fences, kind of a no man's land in between. And you could see the Cubans over there, and you would be able to see them doing their shift changes like we do. And you know sometimes we give them the friendly one finger salute if they're watching us, and they would do it back, you know. So, but it was, and we had minefields set up around certain of our guard towers, and those are the ones that were closest to the airfield. So we had minefields around a couple of our towers there, along with some trenches and some bunkers that had been dug by engineers a long time ago. I think the shifts were like 8 hours, I believe, and you either had normal day shift like 8 to 4 or 4 to midnight, and or you had a midnight to 8 in the morning, and there was just nothing going on out there a lot of times, and you weren't allowed to have like bring any kind of radios or anything like that or any kind of entertainment. So it would get very boring. Even though I would sneak a book out with me once in a while. But it would get in our sergeant of the guard. He would make at least one round during your shift. He would come out and check on your post, see how you're doing, maybe bring a meal out. Sometimes we got hot meals delivered to us, and but otherwise you had a good 8 hours or so for a lot of self reflection.
And you've got live ammunition with you.
That is correct. Well, all our posts had live ammunition with us. We had live. Every Marine was issued. Oh, I can't remember how many magazines it was. I think it was 6. As soon as before you left to go stand guard, because you had to do a guard mount prior to going out on guard and relieving the sentries that were out there. So everybody got issued, like, I think it was 6 magazines full, and that's what you would take up there. We didn't have any heavy weapons on the post. It was just a rifle, so we weren't allowed to have anything heavier than that, because we were just there to watch the fence line and report. We weren't there necessarily to engage. We were just to report, observe, and report.
And what were your rules of engagement?
If memory serves me correct, if you were fired upon, you could return fire. I can't remember exactly what the exact rules of engagement were. I know if you got fired upon, you were allowed to return fire, but other than that, you weren't allowed to shoot unless it was you were or if you came across a defector. If it was or somebody out there who was trying to do you harm, then you could obviously protect yourself or protect the base from any immediate danger. Yeah, then you were allowed to engage.
Was it really only the military you could see, or could you observe other life in Cuba?
We had one post that was the furthest one out, and there was as the base is bisected by the bay, just outside of our perimeter of Guantanamo Bay, and I mean literally just outside, like maybe half mile to 3/4 of a mile, there was a very small city, more like a town probably, called Camaraderie. And you could look over in there from this one particular guard tower. You could look right down in there, and you can see people with their washing hanging on the line. You can see old Chevys and old Fords driving around, because that's all they. Once Castro came to power, all the new cars stopped pretty much. unless they were Russian cars. But yeah, you could see people walking around. And you can see, and ships over there, fishermen on their side of the bay out there fishing. It was definitely interesting. Sometimes they would have power outages over there because they're in Cuba. They in that particular area of Cuba, they were using an old U.S. built power station, and every once in a while they would just have these big blackouts. They would just go dark because they can't get spare parts for their power plants because they were all U.S. made due to the embargo. But it was interesting to see that, all their old stuff over there, and you just see people milling around and going going to and fro from wherever they were doing. It was very interesting.
Yeah, I guess that was probably the most preferred post to take guard from, because at
Yeah,
least you had something to watch.
yeah, and it was. And I remember one time being on a guard on guard post at that particular post. It was early in the morning. I got there in the morning, and I heard something. I was like, "What is that sound?" And it sounded like an engine. It sounded like it was an old, like an old radial engine. I kept looking. It was coming from the direction of the Cuban side. I kept looking, and I got on my what we call our big eyes. These big binoculars are on a stand. And I looked, and I was looking, and it's like there. And finally, I saw it. It was a Soviet-made AN-2 Colt biplane. I don't know if you're familiar with what those look like. It's like a big, bulky biplane, and it was just coming towards Camaraderie, and I could see it. It was getting lower and lower as I was getting close to Camaraderie. It was just putting along real slow because they have virtually no airspeed. He was just putting on. He flew right over this baseball field, and you see a bundle drop out of it, and it landed on the baseball field. And off to the side of the baseball field, I see I see this motorcycle sidecar come come running off this come in from the side of the baseball field and picks up the bundle, and they put it in the sidecar, and they drove off into the city. So I'm guessing it was maybe like mail or something, but I was fascinated with that.
Wow. Wow. It's a unique way for the Cuban Postal Service to
Yeah,
deliver.
yeah. I'm assuming it was the mail. I don't. I'm not sure if it was secret orders from Castro or the mail.
Were they ever trying to broadcast propaganda to you through loudspeakers or anything like that, like on the DMC?
No, I've never heard of anything like that happening anywhere down there. It was usually pretty quiet. The Cuban Frontier Brigade, which was the unit that was opposite us. I never heard anything from them other than the only thing they would ever do that I saw. They would try to intimidate us or do anything towards us was they on our side, directly across from our friends from us. They had a small barracks where they would post their Frontier Brigade, some of their Frontier Brigade soldiers, and they had a small firing range not too far from there, and you would see them out there occasionally shooting off their AKs or blasting off an RPG or two towards their side, not towards us. They didn't, in a safe distance away from us, but you can see them out there on their range shooting their various weapons and stuff. I don't know if it was done as an intimidation thing or what, but maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. I don't know. I don't know if they were just doing just their version of qualifications or what.
I guess you had to do exercises just in case the Cubans decided that they wanted the base back.
Yeah, yeah, we would do one. It was a yearly thing. I forget what it's called. I think it was called DefX or Defense X. It was DefX for short. I believe that was about what it was called. But yeah, it was a big base wide drill. And it spanned a couple of days, and we would work in tandem with the Navy because on our side of the base we had a small platoon of Navy guys who did defense, who were defense as a part-time their side job. It was a platoon of Navy personnel. They were all people of like cooks and aircraft mechanics and things like that, and they were called Q platoon. And we would do this exercise with them, and they would just kind of augment us in some of our positions. And you would see them in their very old style Vietnam era steel pot helmets and their Vietnam era flak jackets and the old M6 version of the M16s. And they would augment us in some of our positions and stuff and help and assist us.
If the Cubans did attack, was there a length of time that you were expected to hold out for,
Well,
or
I
not?
don't, I don't, I don't think we had any hopes of hold up for very long. so, so, especially if you were on the sentry duty, you were pretty much gonna probably be gone. Yeah, I mean, I remember that issue coming up because people were a little worried that, especially some of the posts that are a little further out. If something was to happen, you probably weren't gonna make it. Because you were so far out there, there was no way for you to get back because everything was clustered around the base. At least on our side, everything was clustered around the base, and we had some small hills around the airfield. And around those hills, we had some entrenchments, some trenches, and a few bunkers here and there scattered to facing particular avenues of approach. We also had the minefields just on the other side of those bunkers and trenches, and that was kind of our fallback position, so to speak. We weren't going to try and defend the entire base. We would just fall back to where it was more defensible. So
Yeah.
that was the intent.
Were you patrolling along the fence line as well? So you weren't just in the watchtowers. Did you have to do foot patrol?
Yes, yes. We every week when we were on the fence line, there was at least one. There was at least a couple patrols that would go out at night, and you would carry live ammo, and you were designated you would patrol this area along the fence line at night, or such and such area, or sometimes you would do an LPOP set up with you and one other guy, and you would sit there for a couple of 2-3 hours and in a hide position. They would issue you some of the old style night vision goggles, and you would go do your patrol. You'd get inserted by vehicle. 9 times out of 10 it'd be by vehicle, and they would drop you off. Like when they would try to do it stealthily. They would drop you off at either, like when they were going to go relieve the post, do shift change at the post. As they would pull up or get to an area that was kind of wooded or brushy when we knew the Cubans couldn't observe us, we would quickly jump out of the vehicle and go into the weeds and wait till the vehicle would move off, and then we would get in our patrol formation and walk the perimeter, and then meet the vehicle back at a specific time and location, and then they would pick us back up and go back to the barracks.
Were there any incidents while you were there along the fence line that you can recall?
Other than we had a few defectors, we never had any, like, there was never any aggression from the Cuban side, but we did have some defectors here and there. Generally, our defectors didn't come across the fence because their side was mined also, as far as we knew. And so I think there might have been one that came across the fence, but it was on the windward side. I'd heard about it kind of through the grapevine thing. But generally, when we got defectors, they would swim along the coast and swim. And once they got in the water on the Cuban side, they would go out a short distance, go around the Cuban sentry post, and then make their way towards shore, towards us. And then they would see our post, because our post that was closest to the water, it had a big strobe light on it, so you could see it for miles and miles and miles. So they knew where to go, and they would swim to that. And we've had it on several occasions. We've caught some defectors there. They're not really should say caught, because they gave themselves up. They would swim right to the shore, and the way the geography there is, the post is right up to the edge of the shore, but it's a cliff. It's a good 30-40 foot drop down to the ocean. And I know particularly one night, one of my buddies, he was standing in that post that's right next to the shore, and all of a sudden he heard some yelling and screaming, and he looks down on the shore, and there's two Cuban guys down there waving their hands, yelling for him. And so they called the sergeant of the guard out. They brought him up off the cliff, because there's a little path that goes down, and they brought him up. And so there's a couple Cubans who defected. They swam all the way. They probably swam a couple miles through the water to get to freedom.
Wow. Well, and what happened to those defectors when they arrived in the base?
As far as I know, they get processed and they're given asylum. So that's the only. I mean, there's no. I've never heard of like there's no criminal charges or anything like that I'm aware of. I mean, they don't send them back or anything. They usually just take them and give them asylum.
Were any Cubans working on the base?
Yes, there were. I don't think I put that in my notes either.
I've done my research, Chris. You know,
Because when Castro came to power, there were still quite a few Cubans who worked on the base who lived on the Cuban side, the communist side. So when Castro came to power, he said, "Okay, I'll allow them to continue working, but they're not allowed to hire anybody else. It's just them. Once they retire or die or whatever, then that's it. They're not going to be replaced. There'll be no more of that." So when I was there, there was maybe less than a dozen that still came across to work there on the base because we had on the windward side there was a big gate at this one particular location, and that's where they would come through at. That's where all the workers would come through at, and there was a bus there would meet them and pick them up once they came through the gate. They checked all their credential and their ID and everything, and they go up, they get on the bus, and they get transported to their job wherever it was on the base. And I do particularly remember one time I had to get a new ID card. I had to go to the other side of the base on the windward side, take the long ferry over there, get over there, and went to the ID card office. And there was a Hispanic gentleman in there processing. He's doing your new ID card because I got promoted. So I did my ID card. And then maybe a year or two later, and I particularly remember this guy for some reason, but I remember about a year or two later, there was a documentary done about Guantanamo Bay, about the Cubans who still worked there. And lo and behold, there was that guy. So I didn't even know he was a Cuban.
brilliant,
He spoke pretty good English.
brilliant. It's strange, you know. You think they'd be worried about intelligence gathering from having Cuban workers in there?
Yeah, yeah. That was I remember because we used to get intel briefings occasionally, and I think that did come up. That was explained to us. You know, I think they did keep an eye on them per se. You know, but I'm sure they had gathered some info and reported it back to to wherever. You know,
Yeah.
I got no doubt they somewhere somebody did. I'm sure.
I don't know. I guess I imagine issuing ID cards is perhaps not where a job that you'd expect.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
but hey, who am I to say? Who am I to say? You mentioned the Colt flying in or dropping off that package on the other side of the fence. Were there any defectors who tried to fly in?
Yes, there were. Our platoon was on duty when one of our sentries spotted this AN-2 Colt coming from Cuba on the Cuban side. He saw it. He called it in as they got closer and closer to the fence line. It was coming straight for the base, and before anything could happen, the plane had already overflew the fence line on the Cuban side and our fence line, and it landed at the airfield. And inside was the Cuban pilot and all his family, and he was defecting. And they said when I was told that when he landed and all the family spilled out of the airplane, there was quite a number of family members, and they said it was like chaos there for a couple minutes trying to round everybody up and figure out what was going on. You know, it was they said it was kind of a chaotic scene for a few minutes till they got a grasp on the situation, sorted it all out.
Wow. What happened to the plane? Did they let the
It was flown
Cubans
back.
pick it up? All right.
Yes, it
Fly
did.
back.
We did because in Key West, there's been a number of defections in Key West where military pilots have defected with their plane, like a jet fighter plane. I know that's happened a couple times, and they'll allow the Cuban government to send a pilot over to pick it up and take it back. It's their
Brilliant.
property, essentially.
You mentioned a little while back about some tanks being available for defence. How many were there, and what type? I presume they weren't the bang up to date ones.
No, we had, I want to say it was 4 tanks. We had a small tank platoon, and they were M60 Pattons, I believe they were. We did not have M1s because at the time, the Marine Corps had. I think we were probably one of the last M60 patent units in the Marine Corps, and that was another thing was being an isolated base like we were. We were we were kind of last on the supply line, the tail end of it. I remember getting to when I arrived in Guantanamo Bay, we were still using on the guard towers on the fence line. We were still using, and actually not just in the guard, but in our own inventory that we could carry with us. We went to the field was the M79 grenade launcher, the 40 millimeter grenade launcher. I don't know if you're familiar with that. You see it on any Vietnam movie. You'll see one. It looks like a big shotgun that breaks down. You put the round in. They called it a blooper. It's a
Yeah,
single
yeah.
shot.
I think I have
We still
seen
had
one.
those. We were still using those, and they had just gotten rid of some other older Vietnam era equipment just prior to me arriving there. The 106 recoilless rifle they were still using, which is antiquated, and they were still using that just prior to me getting there. But I did like the M79. It's a good weapon. I was actually pretty good with that.
What sort of air defense did the base have? Was there any anti-aircraft weapons?
We had a couple of 50 cals, 50 caliber machine guns in our platoon because we had the way that the two platoons were set up. One was all anti-tank, and the other one was all machine gunner and mortar. And the machine gun and mortar platoon, they actually had some 50 cals, and they had some anti-aircraft mounts for the 50 cals. That's the only air defense that I've ever saw or heard of that they're at the base. Well, they had missile launchers. It was kept secret from me. I don't know.
So as you say, if the Cubans had come across in force, you were sort of going to be like a road bump to slow them down.
Probably, yeah. It would be,
Speed bump
yeah,
is what I meant.
I'm sure they would have no problem blitzkrieging through us. So yeah, well, they're old. Even though their equipment is even then a lot of their stuff was very old, getting very old. I don't think they would have much of a problem. I mean, nowadays their stuff all belongs in a museum.
You had a note about minefield education and volunteering to assist the engineer.
Yeah. So we have at the time it was the minefield there was I believe it was the second largest minefield in the free world, next to the one. Because I think there was the one in the DMZ in Korea. I think that was the biggest. But so we had the minefield there, and the mines have to be rotated out every once in a while because you can't just put it in the ground and leave it forever. I know that's happened in the past with conflicts and everything. So they keep them rotated out every few years. They would rotate the mines out, and the way the mines were set up then, I don't know if they are now. There would be an anti-tank mine surrounded by a couple of bouncing Bettys, and you would have this very narrow path. It was maybe a foot and a half wide that wound through the minefield, and you could see it because we would put wire down so you see it. You can see, okay, there's the path, right? There's the wire, so that's the path, and you could follow it through. And I remember I had to. I can't remember if I volunteered for it or if I was voluntold to do it. But we had a minefield unit, and they were Marine engineers, combat engineers, and but their sole task was to take care of the minefields, and they were called minefield maintenance. And sometimes they would come over to our side of the base to work on our minefield on our side because there was also a minefield on the windward side on the larger part of the base, but we had some mines on ours. So they would come over periodically to do their maintenance on the minefield, which means they have to extract the older ones and put new ones in. And they would come over, but they would need some help because there would only be like 3 or 4 of them, maybe 5 at the most. So they would need help, like to carry the mines to and from the minefield. So you would get again, I can't remember if I was told to do it or I volunteered. I want to say I volunteered. So you go out with them, and they're like, okay, we're gonna we're gonna go to this section over here. We're gonna pull these mines out. I'll pull them out. I'll deactivate them. I'll give you the signal. You come out. Follow you'll come out. I'll set them on the ground for you. They'll be deactivated. You can pick them up by the handle and tote it back. Take the old one out to the car or the vehicle, or next to it. They'll set it next to the vehicle. They'll set them on the ground, and then bring the new ones back with you. And you would go out there, and you could wind your way through the minefield, and you would look over maybe a foot and a half over, and you could see the little prongs of the bouncing Betty sticking up out of the ground. And you'd just walk right by it, and you go to where he's at, and you'd set new ones down, and pick up the old ones, and you take the old ones back, and I got a little certificate for it. I think I still got it in my closet, and I had a they'll hang signs on the fences around because there is barbed wire around the minefield. So they'll hang a little signs on their little mine, the little mine sign, it says caution mine, but it's in Spanish and English. So I remember I had to steal one of those and put it in my under my shirt and bring it back. And I don't know whatever happened to it. I think I've lost it. I don't know, it disappeared somewhere. But yeah, it was this unit called Minefield Maintenance, and they were really good. And I remember they would in the minefields. We had an explosion in the mine. I think I was asleep one night when they had an explosion on the minefield, and it turned out to be a deer had gotten out there and tripped one of the bouncing betties. And so one of the minefield maintenance guys, he takes a small boat across the bay, comes over, and it was just one guy. And he comes over, and he comes over to the barracks, and the sergeant of the guard takes him out to the post to where the Marines said to the Marine who reported it, and the Marine points out that it's the general area because it was dark out. He points out the general area he heard the explosion come from, and so they'll sit there and they'll wait until daylight till the rest of the unit comes over by ferry, and they'll go out there and investigate. And sure enough, it was a deer that set one of them off and blew him to smithereens. But wasn't much left of the deer.
No. I mean, the bouncing Betty ones are the ones that sort of like fly up into the air and then
they come up about waist high, and then it explodes outwards.
Yeah.
From what I understand, they used to not come out because when I was there, they would come out for all minefield explosions because it happened. It happened. I think several times I was there, but that was their protocol, was to come out if there was an explosion so they could investigate it. And the reason I heard, and I'm not 100% sure, the reason I heard they come out for everyone was because years before that there had been an explosion in a minefield, and nobody had checked on it. And I guess the minefield maintenance went out there sometime much, much later to go work on the minefield, and there were human remains sitting out there. And apparently, from what they suspected, may have been a defector coming across the fence, and he just wandered into the minefield and set it off. Now, I'd heard, I could never confirm that story, but I had heard that several times.
The base sounds very isolated where you are. What did you do in your free time? What were the options?
Well, you had a few options. You could go snorkeling, or you could go to the pool, or you could go read a book or watch a movie in your room, or you could go to the bar, the enlisted club across the street, and do some drinking. So we did a lot of drinking, that's for sure. Yeah, we had a lot of issues with alcoholism there because the base was so isolated, and you couldn't go anywhere other than the base. As a matter of fact, alcoholism had become such a problem, not just with the Marines, but overall base wide, because it's such an isolated post, that alcoholic counseling was mandatory for everybody. And you had several levels of it. You had the basic level, which everybody had to go to. Everybody had to participate in it, from the higher ups all the way down. And then you had the second level, which is if you had like some sort of alcohol related incident, you had to go to counseling for about a week or so, a week and a half or whatever it was. It was a lengthy period of time you had to go for. And then if you had some serious alcohol issues, they would send you back to stateside for counseling. And I knew at least one who got sent stateside for alcohol counseling. But yeah, all of us had to go to the first level of counseling, which was mandatory. It was like a 3-day class, and it was mandatory for everybody.
So was there only one bar you could go to, the enlisted bar, or was there more than one?
There on our side of the base, we just had the one. We called it enlisted, but there was probably a few officers in there. I mean, kind of everybody. It was like a kind of a come one, come all
Mm-hmm.
type place. You could get food there also, so sometimes we'd go there and eat. And we had some Jamaican cooks who were just fantastic cooks, fantastic. They had these big barbecues outside, and they would make jerk pork, chicken, or beef, and man, it was really good food, great cooks. And we'd go. They'd have Friday or Saturday nights have big parties in there, and then fortunately the barracks was right across the street, so it was easily stumbling distance, to back to your room. The other side of the base, they had a number of other big bars. They had a one called the Windjammer. It was a big kind of outdoor place because we got very very little rain there in Cuba, so a lot of stuff was outdoors. So we had a bar that was outdoors. As a matter of fact, most of all of our movie theaters were outdoors. It was like stadium seating outside. There was because there was virtually no rain, so you just sit outside and watch your movie. But yeah, there was 3 or 4. The Navy had a couple bars over on the other side of the base. The Marine Corps barracks headquarters. I think there was a small bar there. I actually never went to that one, so I have no idea what it was like. But I went to a couple of the Navy ones on the other side. Some of the guys would want to go out and party, and so we'd take the ferry and go over there and go hang out, try and talk to some Navy girls or whatever.
Was there much female company in the base?
The only females I think we had 1 or 2 female Marines, but not on our side, over at the headquarters. And they were like clerks or something like that. But there were female naval personnel. One of our guys married a Navy girl, and they actually got a room together. Once they got married, they gave him a room over in the barracks, and they lived there. I don't know if they're still married or not, but I have no idea. But yeah, he married a Navy girl, and a couple other guys were dating some female Navy personnel in our platoon there. So, yeah, but we had females, not as much as you would think. But
were you able to pick up any TV channels or radio?
Oh, we got all the normal channels because we had cable. They were nice enough to give us that. So we had cable. We could watch, HBO and all that stuff. And we got all the normal channels. We got all the normal stuff, ABC, NBC. Watched all the news from home. So you could, of course, you didn't have your local news, but we had, international news, all your main channels, all your main channel news. So, you could watch ball games and all that stuff in real time. You don't have to record anything.
Did you ever have a look to see whether you could pick up Cuban TV?
No, as far as I know, you couldn't. We couldn't get it for some reason. I don't know. I don't know if any of us have. I've never watched Cuban TV, and I don't think anybody I know of there watched Cuban TV. I can't remember if anybody watched it. I know I never did. And I don't recall if it was widely available to watch, I should say.
Or may not have been worth watching anyway.
Probably not.
Potentially. How easy was it to contact home? Were you able to make phone calls from there?
Yeah, we had phone calls. We had a phone booth in our barracks, and it was a direct line to an operator in the States. There was no dial on it. You just pick it up, and then it goes right to an operator, and you tell them what number you want to call, and they call that number. If there's nobody that you can call home all you want. Yeah. Of course, there was no email, or email really wasn't big yet. So you had to call. No texting.
Or write a letter, I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah, write a letter. Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yep. Yep.
Those were the days when we wrote letters. You mentioned a little while earlier that you got promoted. Tell me
Right.
about that.
I was promoted from PFC, which is E2, to Lance Corporal, E3. I wasn't an NCO. I was just, and then it was Lance Corporal was the rank below Corporal, which Corporal would be in your NCO. I remember getting promoted to that. I was pretty proud. And then shortly after that, I kind of became what was called a senior Lance Corporal because most of our other senior Lance Corporals had already rotated back home. So now I became the guy who got to tell people what to do. The squad leader, and yeah, yeah, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed that aspect of it. Yeah, so
I guess you've seen the film A Few Good Men.
yes, yes,
How representative is that of
it was.
life on Guantanamo?
Funny thing is, Rob Reiner, the director, he came down to Guantanamo Bay when I was there. When he was writing this, finishing the script up for that movie. I didn't meet him, but he did come down there and he got a tour of the base and tour of the fence line. It was it wasn't it wasn't like that, the hazing or whatever. Our hazing was most of the time pretty harmless stuff. I never heard of anything getting that out of control. When it comes to dealing with people who have an issue dealing or adjusting to military life, so to speak. Now I did hear once I left Cuba, some of the guys in my platoon had got into some serious trouble for hazing. They had actually injured somebody. I don't know what the circumstances were, what happened, but that was that was not the norm, though. That was not the norm when it came to hazing. Most of our hazing was fairly harmless stuff, you know.
As you can imagine, that's my only reference point really for Guantanamo Bay. And with Hollywood, I know they're gonna, add
Oh, they're gonna twist and
drama
turn it.
and
Yeah, but it was actually it was a pretty decent. It did describe a little bit of life down there, just I think some of the footage they show, they actually show a little bit of footage of the fence line, and that was actually taken there on the fence line.
oh
You can
wow,
see some of the guard
okay,
you can see some of the guard towers in the back along the fence.
yeah, okay. Okay, I'm surprised they were allowed to film there. Perhaps that's before they saw the script.
You can do anything when you get permission.
In your notes, you said getting caught sleeping on guard duty. I'm assuming that didn't end well.
No, that did not. Yeah, I was new there. I was probably been there, I don't know, couple 2, 3 months maybe, and I was working the night shift, and I was still new at working night shift, still adjusting, and I was standing in the tower. It's probably 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and my eyes were just getting heavy. I hadn't gotten much sleep, and my eyes just started getting heavier and heavier, and I caught myself a number of times nodding off. And next thing I know, there's the sergeant of guard. I lifted my head. I knew I had fell asleep. I was standing up. I tilted my head up, my eyes open, and there stood behind me is our sergeant of the guard, right behind me. He he had drove all the way out there because I wasn't answering the radio because we had to do radio checks every once in a while, and I wasn't answering the radio because I was asleep. And he drove all the way out there. It was a good 15-minute ride out to that tower. Drove all the way out there and walked all the way up the steps before I even woke up. You know, stood right there next to me. And I was like, "Oh, this isn't going to be good." So, fortunately, in the end, because that is a punishable offense, sleeping on guard duty. Obviously, I'm sure it is in your guys' military. I was fortunate. I had some very hard NCOs, but they were for the most part fair, and they kept it off of my record. But I had to go do other things like dig fighting positions and dig a fighting position and then fill it back up and go over to another spot and dig another one and fill that one back up and go over here and do and a lot of imaginative punishment like that. So But in the end, I was thankful because they kept it off my record, you know, and I couldn't go anywhere. I had to stay in the barracks, you know, I wasn't allowed to go out. But like I said, in the end, I was thankful for what they did, you know.
That's not like the movies at all, Chris.
No, no.
When you look back at your service in Guantanamo, what would you say was the thing that you enjoyed the most, or the best experience that you had there?
I really liked the beach, and then we had a little lagoon that we could go to and do some snorkeling in. I mean, that was just awesome. I thought because you just put your swim fins on, your and go dive in this warm water in the lagoon, you know, and see the sea life out there. That was I thought that was probably one of the best things, you know, right that I could think off right offhand. I mean, you know, of course we had the monotony. I didn't miss that, you know, and honestly, I did like you know did quite a bit of drinking. I don't miss that either. But I did like the weather down there and the beach and the water and
Yeah.
the camaraderie was pretty good. Our camaraderie we were pretty tight, you know. We did, you know, we hung out together. We stayed. A lot of us stayed in touch for a short while after we left there, and then after a while, everybody kind of drifted off, and did their own thing.
What would you say was the worst thing about being there?
The heat and dealing with several of our staff and COs. Like I said before, they were hard, and of course they were fair. They were fair for the most part. And we had one in particular. He he was something else. He could be a real asshole, I guess, for lack of better words. Yeah, he treated us pretty hard. But in the end, I think it kind of it made you a little bit of a better Marine in the end, you know, because he himself had a checkered past. He had been a drill instructor at Paris Island. Something happened with a recruit. He gets fired. He gets demoted all the way down to E3, and then made it all the way back in rank to E6, which took a number of years. So, but he was, I think he had a lot of animosity, but and I think sometimes he took it out on us. But like I said, in the end, I think it did make me a better Marine because you have NCO, staff NCOs and NCOs that you want to emulate, and you have some that you don't really want to emulate, and you try to take a little bit from both to make yourself a better Marine.
So you're actually out there for 18 months.
Yes, it was supposed to be a 12-month tour. Then Desert Shields Desert Storm happened. I got there in March of 1990, and of course I was supposed to leave in March of 1991, and the Desert Shield kicked off in I believe it was August of 90, if I'm not mistaken, August or September. And so the war, you know, the Desert Shield was going. The build up for Desert Storm was building up. It was building up, and then by about December, I think of 1990, we started hearing rumors that we were getting extended involuntarily 6 months because at the time the buildup was so great over in Saudi Arabia for Desert Shield, Desert Storm that the Marine Corps froze. If you were overseas already, you were frozen there because they were sending anything and everything over to the Gulf, over to Saudi Arabia. So we all got extended involuntarily for 6 months, and we had some pretty upset people because we had people who were leaving when the news came down. We had people who were about to rotate back to the States within a couple of weeks, and they had already packed all their stuff up and sent it home. So then some of them had their stuff sent back to Guantanamo Bay, so the personal effects and things like that. So you had a lot of upset people. You know.
Yeah. It makes you wonder why the US still hang on to that base.
Well, the base came about as a result of the Spanish-American War. I believe there was a small a small fishing area there, a village there, and the U.S. took over that area. They wanted to make a coaling station. Back ships in those days were powered by coal, so they wanted to put a coaling station there. They built that, and then the base just slowly grew over the years, and it just got bigger and bigger and bigger to the point where and now they had airfields there, and I know during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the place was bursting at the seams with personnel because they were putting a lot of people in there and to help guard the base during the missile crisis. As far as I know, I think we still pay Cuba a fee for that base every year as per the agreement, the original agreement from the days of, I think, Batista. I think it's like something like that.
When I was doing research for this, apparently the check is always sent to the Cuban government, but they've only cashed one of them. They cashed one of them, and Castro said that was an error.
I heard he kept them in his desk drawer too. Well, the need for that base kind of comes and goes. There was one time I remember there being some issues going on in Haiti, and this was in 91. So there was some kind of big riot there, or something was going on. It wasn't the Haiti coup attempt in 95. It wasn't that one. It was this. I'm sure it was some other coup attempt prior.
What Chris is referring to here is the 1991 Haitian coup, which resulted in the overthrow of the democratically elected president of Haiti, Jean-Bertrand Aristide, by the Haitian military and police. The violent takeover forced Aristide into exile in Venezuela. Thousands of Aristide supporters were killed, which drove a mass exodus of Haitian refugees to Guantanamo Bay and the United States by boat.
But then there was an influx that they brought in some more Marines, that they were getting some helicopters, some of the big CH-53s that were going to fly them over to Haiti. The Navy brought in some more jet fighters that were going to send some, I guess, to provide support. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was an issue in Haiti that was going on. So we had an influx of Marines there on our side of the base. We had about 300 Marines. They were all prepping to go over to Haiti, I think to help secure the embassy or something like that. Or I can't. My memory fades, and I can't remember what the issue was. But I do remember there was an issue over in Haiti, and there was an influx of some personnel and fighter aircraft that came over. They were staging there to do something over there. But so there was that issue because the base was probably the closest to Haiti, so that's why they staged there. And then there's periods where nothing's going on and it's quiet, and the only thing the base is pretty much being used for was Coast Guard, because they would fly out of there to go look for the drug runners coming across the Caribbean. I know now. I think right now there's going on with this because of the supposed Venezuela thing that's going on. So now there's an influx of people down there right now, from what I understand, prepping to do something or whatever it is. Who knows? But yeah, the use for the base kind of comes and goes, and I've never understood why it was never gotten rid of anyways. Just, especially with the way air travel's got, or we can send anything anywhere in the world. I never really saw much need for that base anymore, but who knows? Maybe one day again in the future we're gonna need it.
I guess it's a handy location for anything going on in South America, Central America.
Yeah.
The episode extras, such as videos, photos and other content, are available via a link in the episode information. The podcast wouldn't exist without the generous efforts of our financial supporters, and I'd like to thank one and all of them for keeping the podcast on the road. The Cold War conversation continues in our Facebook discussion group. Just search for Cold War Conversations in Facebook. Thanks very much for listening, and look forward to seeing you next week.